Hi everyone, my name's Matt, and if you're watching this video, I probably don't need to tell you that right now in 2026, it's a pretty bad time to try and build a PC, especially if you're on a tight budget. With that being said, if you're willing to go used and get a little creative, you can put together a powerful gaming PC for surprisingly cheap. Now, the method I've been employing to do this recently is to buy an older custom system and with a few additional parts hobble together a respectable gaming PC. I did this exact method in a recent video where I built a system with a final cost of just $350. And when showing examples of the types of PCs that might be worth buying to do this in that video, I found a bunch of listings for this same type of system that were reasonably priced and would act as a good base for a build. So I decided, what the heck, let me try and pick one of these up, see how they perform, and upgrade it for more modern gaming. So I just picked one of those systems and sent in an offer. We eventually settled on a price of $300 with free shipping, so I submitted my payment and patiently waited for the PC to arrive. About a week later, this massive box landed on my doorstep and I opened up to see what I got. Of course, the seller used packing peanuts, which isn't the end of the world, they're just super annoying in my opinion. There were also thick hunks of foam on all sides of the box, and the PC itself was wrapped in a few layers of bubble wrap. So the exterior of this PC was protected about as well as you can without having the original custom cut foam that would have come in a case box. And the reason I'm emphasizing the exterior protection is because when I got the bubble wrap off, I honestly couldn't believe my eyes. There was zero internal foam or protection, meaning the GPU and cooler were very susceptible to damage during shipping. The GPU itself was sagging a fair bit, but there wasn't any noticeable damage to the parts inside. So before I did anything else, I decided to plug the PC in and see if it even boots. Thankfully, it booted right up. So what did I get for my $300? Well, this is a custom PC that I'm not sure the origin of, but I'm guessing it's from some sort of business, school, or other enterprise type environment. The case is a beat up Fantex Eclipse P300, which was a popular budget case that came out in 2017. It's got a red and black color scheme, and like I said, it's pretty beat up with a bunch of scuffs and scratches, which isn't ideal, but that doesn't affect performance, and we'll explore some simple fixes for this later in the video. At this point, I went ahead and pulled off the side panel to get a better look at the internals. And the system definitely was a little dusty, but I was able to make quick work of that with this super powerful battery-powered air duster from the sponsor of today's video, Wolfbox. I've actually been using this thing a ton recently because when you're messing around with used electronics, they often show up absolutely packed with dust, and instead of buying a bunch of disposable compressed air cans, this thing is completely wireless and rechargeable, so you can just grab it whenever you need it. The MF200 is surprisingly powerful too. It has up to 87.5 meters per second of airspeed, which is way stronger than I expected from something this small. It also has 3 different power levels, so you can use lower settings for lighter cleaning or crank it all the way up for stubborn dust inside of heat sinks, fans, radiators, keyboards, pretty much anything. This even moves enough air to quickly inflate an air mattress, which is kinda crazy. It also comes with 4 different nozzles, including a really narrow one that's perfect for getting into tight spaces, and since it's battery powered, you don't have to drag around a cord or wheel out an air compressor every time you want to dust something off. And this is actually more powerful than the corded DataVac style one that I used to use, while simultaneously being way more convenient. If you work on PCs, consoles, keyboards, or really anything that needs dusting, this is one of those things that's just super convenient to have around. So if you want to check out the Wolfbox MF200 air duster for yourself, I'll have links down in the description below. Wolfbox also has different dusters at all different price points, so I'll link some of those as well. Huge thanks to Wolfbox for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to the build. So let's take a quick look at the parts that came in this $300 eBay gaming PC. Pulling off the cooler, which was annoying to do as it unscrews from the back for some reason, gives us a better look at the CPU this PC came with, which is a Ryzen 7 1700X. This is an 8-core, 16-thread CPU that released more than 9 years ago in March of 2017. It can turbo up to 3.8 GHz, and while it's not great for modern gaming, it definitely is still usable depending on what types of games you're trying to play. The CPU is being cooled by the tower-style cooler we just pulled off from a brand called CryoRig, which I don't think they're around anymore, but from what I remember, they were kind of like what Thermalright is now in terms of offering great coolers at very affordable prices. This is a pretty large tower-style cooler with a 120mm fan that handles the 1700X fine and should be able to handle any CPU we would feasibly upgrade to. For the motherboard, this PC is using an MSI Tomahawk B350, which is a very good ATX AM4 motherboard. It's got 4 DIMM slots, good backpanel I/O, very solid VRMs, and is overall just a very high quality board. With that being said, it's definitely starting to show its age, with it only having a single M.2 slot, and it lacks stuff like a front panel USB-C header. For RAM, this PC came with a 16GB kit of Kingston DDR4 at 2666 MHz CL16. For Ryzen CPUs, we definitely would benefit from faster RAM, but with current pricing, this will have to do. On the plus side, this is a dual channel kit, and 16GB is still enough for budget gaming, which you'll be able to see memory usage in the benchmark section of the video. Storage-wise, this PC came with a 512GB NVMe drive in the form of this Sabrent Rocket. This is a high-quality Gen 3 drive that should work great. 512GB is a little small for a modern gaming PC, but it's totally usable, and you can always throw in an extra SATA SSD in the future for more storage when prices drop. For a graphics card, the system came with an AMD RX 580 8GB. This is the MSI Armor model, which is a pretty standard and basic dual-fan design. The RX 580 released over 9 years ago, and the 480 it's based on is almost 10 years old now. With that being said, it still has a little bit of power, and the 8GB of video memory means it should hold up a little better than a lot of other cards from that era. Finally, to power these parts, the system has an EVGA 750G3, which is a fully modular 80+ gold rated 750W power supply. This is a very solid unit that supplies plenty of clean power to the entire build, and even has all black cables to keep the build looking clean. All in, for $300, this isn't the best deal ever, but it's a good set of parts to build off of to hopefully create a budget gaming beast. But before we upgrade anything, I wanted to test some games with the system in its current configuration to see what it can do. I tested 5 popular games on this PC and was honestly kind of surprised at the performance. Starting things off with Valorant at 1080p low settings and by hopping into a deathmatch. Doing this resulted in a 181 FPS average with 1% lows of 78. This was a good experience in my opinion, and the gameplay felt smooth and fluid. In Fortnite, I tested at 1080p in performance mode with far view distance, medium textures, and low meshes. I hopped into a few Blitz Royale matches and was happy to see performance was really good, being actually very close to Valorant with an average of 177 FPS and 1% lows of 82, which was good performance in my opinion. Next, I tested Call of Duty Black Ops 7 at 1080p with the basic preset on the built-in benchmark. Doing this resulted in a 96 FPS average with 1% lows of 71, which didn't look great but should be more than enough performance for casual play. In Minecraft, I tested at 1080p with fancy graphics, 12-chunk render and simulation distance, as well as iris and BSL shaders. Doing this resulted in a 67 FPS average with not great 1% lows of 14. You're probably better off playing without shaders on this system, but it's kinda neat it can play Minecraft with shaders and still produce a 60 FPS average. Finally, I tested Cyberpunk 2077 at 1080p with the medium preset and by using the built-in benchmark. Doing this resulted in an okay 54 FPS average with 1% lows of 43. Overall, for lighter titles and esports titles, this PC did pretty darn well in my opinion, but even older AAA titles like Cyberpunk are going to struggle to run in many cases, which is why we're going to upgrade a few of the parts to get a better gaming experience. So now that we have a baseline understanding of what this system is and how it performs, let's make some upgrades. After thinking about it for a bit, I decided to keep everything except for the CPU and GPU. The motherboard, cooler, SSD, RAM, case, and power supply are all perfectly fine, but if we're wanting good performance in modern games, the CPU and GPU have to go. I decided on setting aside an extra $200 for upgrades, making the total budget for this build $500. Plus, anything I sold from the base system, I would add to that pool of money for upgrades. Now, usually this is where I would say that if I sold these parts, I would get around X dollars, but instead, I decided to actually sell them to show you guys the process and get the most accurate numbers possible. So the first thing I did was pop out both the CPU and GPU, and then I promptly threw them back in so I could update the BIOS. If I didn't do this prior to installing a new CPU, it could have meant the PC wouldn't post if the current version of the BIOS didn't support it. And with that done, I took the parts out again. To sell these, I started by taking good photos of them with my phone, and you don't need studio lighting for this. Just pick a place with a clean background and a lot of natural light, and you'll be okay. Once that's done and I'm sure I have all the photos I need, I actually pack these up in advance so I have the weights and sizes for calculating shipping. For the CPU, if it's an Intel chip, you don't necessarily need a clamshell, but for an AMD AM4 CPU with pins on the back, it's an absolute must. I had a clamshell on hand, but you can pick them up for a couple bucks a piece. Once in the clamshell, I taped it shut, wrapped it in bubble wrap that I saved from an old shipment, and put it in a random small box I had on hand. Then once the box was taped up, I could weigh it and write down the weight and dimensions. For the GPU, I used an old graphics card box I had on hand, but you could totally just use something like an old Amazon box and reuse packing materials to ship it, just ideally you want the GPU in an anti-static sleeve if possible. Then, once the GPU box was taped, weighed, and measured, I was ready to list the item, which I made the listing quickly on my desktop, saved it as a draft, then opened the draft and added the photos directly from my phone, as this is easier than having to transfer them to my PC and upload them to eBay. Then once those photos were uploaded and I was happy with the listing, I set it to go live. I did buy it now or best offer for these, and to see how much to sell them for, I searched for each item, selected the sold listings option, and then sorted by ended recently to see how much people are actually paying for these parts. Then it was just a matter of waiting for people to send in offers and buy the items. And after a week or two, both items sold. Once you factor in eBay fees and the cost of shipping, the CPU netted me $26.79 and the GPU netted me $54.78, or a combined total of $81.57. So if we add that to the $200 allocated for upgrades, that means our total pool of money to spend on parts is just over $280. So let's talk about what upgrades I went with. For the CPU, the one I was aiming to get was a Ryzen 5 3600, which is a very capable 6-core CPU with very solid single-core performance, especially compared to the 1700X we're coming from. When looking at listings, I found for only a few dollars more, I could actually get a Ryzen 5 5500. Now, the 3600 and 5500 perform almost identically, but I prefer going with the 5500 because when I go to sell this PC in the future, I find systems with 5500s move faster than ones with 3600s. And I think this is just because a lot of people assume that a 5000 series Ryzen 5 chip is better than a 3000 series one, which like I said isn't the case. So I got this CPU for $70 with free shipping, and after buying the CPU, I just needed a graphics card. I looked at a bunch of different options and decided to not go with the 6600 XT or 6650 XT I would normally go for, and ended up looking at RTX 3070s. The cheapest ones were the blower style versions, which tend to be kind of loud, so I decided to blow the budget a little bit and get this OEM HP RTX 3070 for $210 plus $8 for shipping, which if you add the CPU and GPU upgrade, we're looking at about $288, which is around $10 over the allotted budget, but that's not the end of the world as the RTX 3070 should perform amazingly in this build. So once the parts came in, I was ready to upgrade the system. Opening up the CPU packaging, I found the seller shipped the 5500 without a clamshell, which is very unfortunate. There were some slightly bent pins that I was able to straighten out with a razor blade, so no harm no foul, but I did message the seller telling them to consider packing PGA CPUs like this differently in the future. The GPU was packaged much better in a pretty standard graphics card box and included the card itself and a dual 8-pin to 12-pin adapter. This is a pretty standard dual fan card with a plain all black design and a metal backplate. The RTX 3070 released around 5.5 years ago and it only has 8GB of video memory, but it's still a beast of a card at 1080p and even 1440p, which we'll look at when we test it out. Also, I decided to wait and see temps before deciding to change out the thermal paste or not. Installing the CPU was easy, but reinstalling the cryo-rig cooler was quite the adventure. This is probably the worst design mounting system I've ever encountered on a cooler. Just everything about it was comically unintuitive, including the fact you have to screw it down from the back, but I did get it installed and could move on to the GPU. The graphics card also went in perfectly fine, but when I went to plug it into power, I noticed one big thing I overlooked, and that's that the 3070 requires two 8-pin connectors, but my power supply only has one. Now this unit has plenty of power for two, it just doesn't have another modular cable installed. Now you can get a compatible cable on Amazon or eBay for around $10, but I actually had one on hand, so I just used that and added $10 to the total. Please note I did extensive research and even tested it myself against the included cable to make sure it's compatible, as mixing modular power supply cables is something you should basically never do unless you for sure know what you're doing. So with the extra cable in, I could pop on the panels and the upgraded build was ready to be tested. All in, the system had a net cost of $518, which is about $20 more than I originally planned to spend, but we'll see in a minute if it's worth the cost. Before testing, I used Display Driver Uninstaller to remove the old AMD graphics drivers, then after a reboot, installed the appropriate NVIDIA drivers for my 3070, and with that, the system was ready to be tested. So I reran the 5 benchmarks from before at the same settings on the upgraded version, so let's first look at the performance gains there. So as you can see, there were big performance jumps for pretty much all those games. With that being said, the system can do a lot better than 1080p low now, so let's crank the settings up and try out some harder games. The first is Arc Raiders, which I finally got recently for testing. I don't really know how to play this game, I kinda just ran around and collected stuff while avoiding other players. I tested at 1440p with the settings it defaulted me to, which was everything set to high and DLSS to auto. After a 10 or 15 minute session of running around, I saw an 84 FPS average with 1% lows of 49, which looked and felt great in my opinion. I'm not sure what settings most people run, so if there's a meta for the settings, let me know in the comments below. Moving on to Borderlands 4, I tested at 1440p with the medium preset, and by just running around and fighting mobs. Doing this resulted in a 60 FPS average with 1% lows of 40. This felt good to me, and seeing the system handle a modern AAA title at 1440p 60 FPS was great. Going back to COD Black Ops 7, I tested again, but this time at 1440p with the Ultra preset and DLSS set to quality. Doing this resulted in a solid 113 FPS average with 1% lows of 79, which looked great visually. Finally, I tested Cyberpunk again, but this time at 1440p using the Ultra preset and built-in benchmark. Doing this resulted in a 75 FPS average with 1% lows of 53. Temperature-wise, while gaming, the CPU stayed in the mid to upper 60s most of the time, and the GPU stayed in the mid to upper 70s most of the time, so temps were fine, but I probably will still change out the GPU thermal paste before I sell it. The final thing to do was pretty it up by just giving it a good wipe down, rerouting some of the cables, and using a black Sharpie to minimize the look of some of the scuffs, and with that, the build is done. All in, the net cost was around $520, and for that price, I think this is a pretty solid system, being able to play a lot of games at 1440p with 60 plus FPS, and there's still room for upgrades including more RAM, more SSD storage, and even more. Is this the greatest $500 build ever? Absolutely not, but I think for the current market, it's pretty good. With that being said, I'm interested to hear what you guys think of it. Let me know in the comments below. So yeah guys, I think it's time to wrap this video up. Thanks again to Wolfbox for sponsoring this video, and you guys can check out the MF200 in the description. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, consider subscribing. And as always, this is Matt from Tech by Matt, signing out.